Hey, today I just wanted to explain a little bit more about the fractal mode because I think it's one of the most powerful modes inside of Vythm, and I put a lot of effort into making it music reactive. Basically, you can find the fractal mode over here. We are starting with the spiral preset, and there a pretty important concept of Vythm become important because basically you have the fractal which is applied, and you also have it combined with a particle background. Basically, you can combine every background with every visualization inside of Vythm, but some make more sense than others. For the particles, you can see that the particles are also flying a little bit in the foreground, but you can also completely adjust the opacity of the fractals. When you go into the settings, you have this opacity slider over here. And you can see, oh, come on. You can see that I can adjust the opacity completely. When I go to 0, I only see the particle effect, but I can also go for any other background. For example, I can also go for the swarm, and then we can adjust the opacity a little bit so it is blending over nicely, and you can see a little bit of the fractal and also a little bit of the background. That's the whole idea of that one. And for now, I just wanted to show you the fractals. We can get rid of the background and go just for a black one, which is also the best idea to go for when you feel like the fractals taking a lot of performance, because it's very computational expensive, and when you have the background enabled as well, that's also taking some computation power. And when you wanted to go for a good performance and a good quality for the fractals, it's always a good idea to disable the background, but you can also try with any of these backgrounds as well and blend it over with the opacity setting. Just try out what fits and works best for you. And in case it's going to lower the frames per second, you can also adjust the quality and go down with the quality a little bit. And that should make it also faster. That said, we can just jump into the fractal mode, and I can show you some pretty cool things about that one. The first most important thing to mention is that we have these different fractal algorithms. We have currently selected the Kleinian. We have the wobbles, which are showing here. We have trees. We have circles. We have an ancient pattern. That's also looking pretty sweet, actually. Whoa. We have the Julia, and we have the Mandelbrot, which most of you probably heard of before. That's the most well-known fractal. For the Mandelbrot, we also have different types I added. Here are the orbit lines, which you can adjust with these parameters here, with the X and Y parameter, which is changing the orbit line, which is going through the Mandelbrot, and that can give you some pretty crazy effects. But we also have different types. We have this continuous Mandelbrot, where you can just see that the Mandelbrot pattern doesn't change, but the look of the whole fractal changes a little bit. Just going back to the fractal type, here we have the stairs as well. And yeah, there are different algorithms and different fractal types, especially for the Mandelbrot, you have different types to choose from. This one also looks pretty crazy. Wow. Just stay for the Kleinian one, and I wanted to explain what I have done to make it look like in the preset. Basically, the visual is reacting to the music, so when I play the song, I can also go for another piece of music. Sad. You can see whenever the bass hits in, when the rhythm comes in, there is some movement inside of this fractal. And I wanted to explain you the reason for that one. The reason for the movement, which is reacting in synchronization with the music, that's first of all the speed of the fractal, which I have mapped to the music. you can see that we can adjust the speed just by its own, so the fractal is moving a little bit, but we can also click on the gear icon and say we wanted to map the speed of the fractal to the music, so for example to the bass, which you can hear in your music. That's the first thing which is making this fractal reacting to the music. And the second thing is here in the coloring tab, the start position of the color which we are choosing from the gradient. Basically, we have enabled color type gradient, which means that we have a gradient which we can select here. And the start value just defines where we start to pick values from inside of this gradient. And when we animate that, it's giving a pretty nice color flow. And the second thing which is reacting to the music is the rotation. Here in the positioning tab, we have different options for animating the position. And here in that preset, I just enabled the auto rotation. I can disable that one for you, so you can see that we don't rotate anymore. When I enable the auto rotation once again, you can see that we are slightly rotating. And I can also adjust this manually. So you can see that we can just change the speed of the rotation. And when we map that to the music, that gives a pretty nice effect. And that's just one example for mapping the different factor parameters to the music, but basically you can just go for every gear slider you have here for every slider, and you can click on the gear icon and map it to the music, and so you can make a lot of things react to the music. We've talked about the different fractal algorithms. There are a lot of things to explore with that one. Then we have the coloring. I shortly explained that there is a color gradient option. Here you can choose the different gradients. And you have some parameters to play around with. For example, the speed of, so we have the color gradient. We can define if we wanted to animate that. So if the colors should change. When I disable that one, you can see that the colors are staying static. And when I enable that one, you can see that the colors are moving a little bit, so they are changing over time. And here I can configure the speed of the color animation. And here we can also define how often the gradient should be repeated. And that are just values you have to play around with for the different fractals, and some settings making more sense for different fractal types. So for example, when I go for the when I go for the ancient one, you can see that it's going to be a bit noisy. And the reason why it's noisy is that we have a lot of repetition in our color gradient. And when I go for a very low repetition, you can see that it's just having one color. When I'm increasing that value a little bit, you can see that we are seeing some colors, and it doesn't look too noisy at all. I can also disable the animate parameter. I can also disable the mapping of the speed. And then you can see that we are going to recognize some nice colors. And when I go for a very high repetition value, you can see that the colors of the gradient we have selected are repeated very often, and it looks kind of noisy. So that could be one reason why it looks a little bit dirty and noisy, because you have a very high repetition value, and you can just adjust this value and getting better results for the color mapping. That's it for the gradient. We also have this RGB functions, which basically consists out of two components: the R component, which is the red component, the G component, which is the green component of your color value, and the B component, which is the blue component of your color value. For each one, you have the option to choose a different formula. You can just experiment with that one. It's pretty hard to explain what they actually do, but some make sense for certain settings, some doesn't make too much sense. And they can give you some pretty cool results when you combine them. For example, that one, that looks pretty cool. And we also have added a much more simple version of this RGB coloring type, where you just define a mathematical function for the R, G, and B value. And when you combine them, that can also lead to some pretty cool things which are coming up. I also see that the whole image are looking a little bit bloomy. And the reason for that probably is that I enabled the bloom. I will just disable that one for now so it looks a little bit more clear. And that's it for the coloring. A lot of things to experiment with. Also pretty nice to animate these things. So for example, the start value which we had before, we can just map that to the music, and then whenever the music is playing, the colors are changing. So we disable that mapping again for now, and we go to the positioning again. Here you have different options to animate the position of the fractal. At the moment we have this enabled, this auto rotation, which basically is creating some kind of a rotation movement, and you can adjust the speed of that one, and you can also disable that completely. There's also some movement going on right now, and the reason for that one is that the fractal itself is animated. And because I wanted to show you some things about the positioning, I wanted to just disable the fractal animation itself. So I just disable it here, and you can see that we just have the static fractal image right now, and nothing is moving anymore. And back to the positioning section, we have the auto zoom feature. You can also adjust the speed and map it to the music, which is pretty cool. We have the gyro feature. That's also pretty nice because when you have an iPhone or an iPad, you can just enable that one and tilt your device a little bit, and you are moving through the fractal, and that's a pretty cool feeling. So just try it yourself. Hard to explain, but pretty cool to experience. Next thing is the auto movement. Here we have different shapes available, like a circle or up and down or left and right. And the idea is that we have a certain animation speed and a certain animation area. So that's basically the length of the animation path. And we are just moving with this pattern through the fractal. Here's the 8 as well. Here we have the circle again, so now we have a circle movement, and we move with a shape of a circle in our fractal. That's it for the auto movement. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the height section. I just mentioned it previously, but basically that effect can be pretty powerful because it's adding some kind of a 3D effect to your fractal. When I disable that one, you can see that we have a plain 2D fractal, and when I enable it again, you can see that we have some kind of 3D shapes appearing inside of our fractal. Here you have a lot of parameters to play around with to adjust the amount of height we add to our fractal, the angle the light is coming from. You can see that the shadows are changing a little bit, the amount of light which we are giving to the whole scene, the intensity of the light, and so on. Yeah, you just have to experiment with all these things here. But that can be pretty interesting in some scenarios. So for example, it looks cool for the ancient one. We can also go to the Mandelbrot orbit line. I will just change the coloring a little bit so that we have some brighter colors here. Let's see if we have something cool. Can add some more repetition and the start value. Okay, it's looking a little bit dark, but that could also be because I just choose the very high height value. But here you can clearly see that we have some kind of a 3D effect which is applied to the fractal as well. That could be pretty interesting for the TIE-IA Mandelbrot type as well. For example, when we go for the height again and adjust this a little bit, you can see that it's giving you a pretty nice 3D effect here. Yeah, I really like the height option enabled with the TIE-IA Mandelbrot type, but there are other options to discover. Just wanted to let you know that there is an option to add some kind of an height effect, and that makes sense for different fractals. I will disable that one for now. Move to another fractal. Let's see what's looking cool. These wobbles are kind of nice. We'll just change the coloring a little bit. We'll go for another gradient. That looks pretty sweet actually. Okay, so we had the position, we had the height, we had the coloring, and now we are going for the texture. Basically, the idea of this texture option is that you can load a certain texture. You have different options here, and when I go for a circle texture, for example, you can see that the surface of the fractal, yeah, there's added this texture, which I previously selected. And there are basically two options for the texture. One is the dynamic mapping, which is which maps the texture in a dynamic way on top of the fractal, which means that it's sometimes a little bit bended. And when you have the static mapping instead, you can see that we just take the texture and map it onto the fractal in a static way. So that looks kind of boring, but makes sense in some scenarios. And the dynamic one just looks pretty immersive, just looks like it's really mapped onto the fractal and not just overlaid. Here you can also apply the scaling of this texture. And that's basically it. A lot of different textures to play around with. And yeah, that is something on top of the fractal algorithm. You just choose the texture you can additionally apply to that, and that sometimes looks pretty cool. For example, when I go for the spiral again, you can see that we also have a texture applied to it, and that is giving the whole fractal a nice touch. Basically, inside of these circles, inside of these circle areas, you can see that we have these nice lines which are coming from the texture I just added to the fractal. A lot of different options, a lot of space to experiment with, and sometimes you can just get crazy results with it. But for now I will disable that one. And now we are coming to the rays. Let's see if I can explain it for that example. Oh yeah, here you can see that in a pretty good way. So the rays are just something I added on top of the fractal, and you have different ray types. And these rays are just appearing inside of the fractal. I can adjust the intensity, and I can also adjust the number of repetitions, and you can see that we have all these nice little artifacts appearing here inside of the fractal. And some settings make more sense with certain fractal algorithms than with others, and you can just try all the different options here, and you can also map all these parameters to the music as well. So for example, when I map the multiplier of the ray to the music, and when I play some music, then you can see that there are some pretty cool effects going on when the music is playing. So that's it for the rays. Little bit hard to explain, just an effect I recently discovered while developing the whole app, and I just thought I would like to offer that to the users, but that's something which is hard to explain and which is easier to just experiment with, and sometimes you come up with something cool. So that's it for the race. We had the position already, the height, the texture, the color, and I think that's it for the fractals. So a lot of different options to explore, a lot of different algorithms to choose from, and a lot of different color options you can apply. And hope you will have some fun with it and getting nice results.